The state of Alabama emerged victorious in its legal battle to protect children from harmful so-called sex change procedures. The state's Vulnerable Child Compassion and Protection Act was challenged 3 years ago by left-wing groups that wanted these dangerous procedures to be lawful for minors. But now the case is officially dropped, and Alabama's law is safe. So why did the opponents retreat? Well, here to discuss this, Alabama Attorney General Steve Marshall, who was defending the law against the opponents. Attorney General Marshall, welcome back to Washington Watch. Thanks for joining us.
Tony, always good to be with you. Thank you.
All right, so we have a little over half the states in the nation have a law similar to this now in place. Some of them still fighting legal challenges. What was at the heart of the challenge to this law protecting minors from these experimental drugs and surgeries?
Yeah, Tony, what we saw, and it's not just in Alabama, but across the country, this argument that parents had the right to be able to make a decision of this gender-affirming care, which we now know is a complete fraud, for their kids, used the Equal Protection Clause as a basis for arguing that states had exceeded their authority. And in fact, we all are now awaiting the Supreme Court's decision in the Tennessee case to be able to see what the court weighs in and says what's the appropriate standard of review. The great thing for Alabama, and I think it's good news across the country and the world, if we've seen the plaintiffs abandon their challenge in our state and recognize that not only were we making sure that we were protecting kids, but there's no legal basis for which these plaintiffs can prevail in cases like this.
I want to get to that in a moment, but I want to go back to one of the things that came up repeatedly in other states, like in Missouri, with the Attorney General there, Andrew Bailey, discussing with us that these medical so-called professionals would tell parents, look, you can have a live son or a dead daughter, and pressure them. So there really wasn't a choice that parents were making as it pertains to these surgeries and treatments.
No, absolutely. And in fact, Tony, one of the cornerstones of our medical system is this idea of informed consent. And one of the things that we were able to uncover as a result of the discovery that we obtained in our case is that even at the international level, this organization called WPATH, which establishes these so-called standards of care, that their doctors and internal documentation and chats acknowledged we can't explain this to parents. We don't have sufficient evidence to be able to show them studies of how what we're doing is right. And if we can't engage parents with informed consents about medicines and surgeries on kids, then we've completely lost what medicine is truly about.
I mean, 7 years ago, General, this was a freight train just barreling down the track, and anyone who dared try to get in front of it was just, run over. But we've seen the tide turn. Education, the fact that we've had state attorneys general like yourself that have challenged the attacks against state laws, Arkansas being the first one. We worked there to get a law through. What is your sense in the reason that this case was, this challenge was dropped? And as you made reference to, is this indicative of a broader impact that the resistance to these this ideology?
Yeah, Tony, it's clear that it wasn't because they lacked the resources, because as you well know, many of the left-leaning, transgender-pushing groups across the country have funded this litigation. Look, even in Alabama, we had the entire weight of the federal government against us during the Biden administration, but they didn't give up because they didn't have the resources to pursue the claim. What we had the opportunity to be able to do in Alabama is to uncover the truth. We exposed the scandal, and we showed the world what was taking place with our kids. And that's the reason why I believe these plaintiffs have raised the flag of surrender and have gone about their own business. I think this is an exciting time. And look, I commend you as well for being able to take the time to highlight what Europe has known for quite some time and what our country is now realizing is the harm that we were doing to kids.
General, the way I interpret this, with them backing off, in basically, as you said, waving the white flag, is this does not bode well for them, I think, in the Supreme Court. I think they see this trending away from them, because if they thought they could kind of use this as we were at a tipping point, they would have continued to pursue their legal challenge.
No, absolutely. In fact, one of the surprising things, frankly, of the timing was they didn't at least wait to see what the Supreme Court would rule, because the Tennessee case is not going to be definitive. It's not going to rule conclusively that states have the opportunity to do it. It would just be, what's that standard of review for the courts when they examine these laws? I think the fact that they have dismissed their case in Alabama, where we have the most robust record in which we have put out in the public domain to be able to show the absolute medical and legal fraud that was occurring here, should demonstrate the fallacy of the arguments of the plaintiffs thus far, and how much states are doing to be able to protect kids, particularly in the 26 states that have already weighed in with laws like Alabama's.
You know, General Marshall, my takeaway from this is when the emperor has no clothes, go ahead and say you got a naked emperor. Because people were afraid to say anything. This was kind of running in tandem with the cancel culture, so people were fearful of just speaking truth.
No, and look, we were losing these cases to begin with, and it was part of the strategy of the left, is that when we don't allow for judges, even conservative judges, to understand the truth behind how these so-called standards of care were developed, when the judges don't have an understanding that you have Rachel Levine reaching out from the Biden administration, telling medical communities to be able to remove the age restrictions on surgeries for kids because you're hurting our political transgender agenda.
Right.
Now that that's revealed, now that we know the truth, it's clear why we're going to ultimately win these cases.
Well, General Marshall, I want to commend you for fighting that good fight and taking that stand on behalf of the children there in Alabama and, by extension, around the country. So thanks for joining us today.
It's been a privilege. Thank you.